The Bears on Hemlock Mountain, Chapter 4. Up Hemlock Mountain. When Jonathan was out of sight of the house, his mother began to worry just a little bit about bears on Hemlock Mountain. Stuff and nonsense, she said to herself. There are no bears on Hemlock Mountain. But perhaps she went back to her cookie making and tried to forget about it. But she couldn't forget. She found she was cutting out cookies to a kind of rhythm. There are no bears on Hemlock Mountain. No bears at all. Of course, there are no bears on Hemlock Mountain. No bears, no bears, no bears, no bears at all. Jonathan went up Hemlock Mountain eating a cookie as he went. It was very still on Hemlock Mountain. The only sound was Jonathan's boots going crunch, crunch, crunch on the snow. He could look back and see the big footprints that he made. It was very lonely, so lonely that Jonathan made up words to go with the crunch, crunch of his boots. Strangely enough, they were the same words as his mother's. There are no bears on Hemlock Mountain. No bears at all. Of course, there are no bears on the Hemlock Mountain. No bears, no bears, no bears, no bears at all. When he got to the top of Hemlock Mountain, Jonathan was out of breath, so he sat down on a log to rest. And as he rested, he took out of his pocket the nuts and the carrots and the breadcrumbs. He put them on the snow a little distance from where he was sitting. It was very still and quiet. To keep up his courage, Jonathan said to himself, There are no bears on Hemlock Mountain, no bears at all. There are no bears on Hemlock Mountain. No bears, no bears, no bears, no bears at all. Then there began to be little sounds all around him. And out of the woods came rabbits hopping over the snow. They came straight to the carrots Jonathan had brought for them. Out of the woods came squirrels. They looked around with bright eyes and put one paw on their hearts, the way squirrels do. Then they came straight to the nuts Jonathan had brought for them. And then came the winter birds, hopping and twittering. They came straight to the breadcrumbs Jonathan had brought for them. Jonathan sat as still as still. He was not lonely now, and he was not worried about bears. He had lots of company. For quite a long time he sat there watching the rabbits and the squirrels and the birds. But time was going on and the sun was lower in the sky. Jonathan knew he must be on his way, so he got to his feet and his boots went crunch, crunch, crunch on the snow. All the rabbits went hopping back to the woods. The squirrels looked around with their paws on their hearts. Then, whisk, and away up the trees. The birds flew up into the branches. Jonathan was alone. Chapter 5. Down Hemlock Mountain. Now Jonathan started down the other side of Hemlock Mountain. It was very still and his boots went crunch, crunch, crunch on the snow. Jonathan could look back and see the endless footprints he was making. It was quiet, so quiet to keep up his courage, Jonathan had said to himself, marking time to the sound of his steps on the snow. There are no bears on Hemlock Mountain, no bears, no bears at all. Of course, there are no bears on Hemlock Mountain. No bears, no bears, no bears, no bears at all. He went down the mountain much faster than he had come up. At the bottom, he stopped and looked back at the enormous footprints he had made in the snow. There were no other footprints, not any at all. Jonathan had been the only one on Hemlock Mountain. It made him feel lonesome just to think of it. And as Jonathan stood still, there was a strange small sound. Drip, drip, drip. The sun was warm on the south side of the mountain, and the snow and ice were beginning to melt. Drip, drip, drip from the branches of trees. Drip, drip, drip from the rocks. It sounds like spring, Jonathan had said to himself. It feels like spring. I hope the bears don't know it. Chapter 6. Aunt Emma's House. When Jonathan began to think about spring and about bears, it made him feel the need to hurry. So he went on very quickly. Down here on the other side of Hemlock Mountain, the sun was even warmer. Drip, drip, drip went the trees. Jonathan's boots were no longer went to crunch on the snow. They sank into it, and he made bigger footprints than before. Soon he was at his Aunt Emma's house. By the gate, some hungry birds were hopping around on the snow. Jonathan felt in his pockets. Yes, there was a few crumbs. So he threw them to the birds and went round to the back door. Jonathan lifted the brass knocker and let it fall. How loud it sounded! But it was a cozy, comfortable sound, not a lonely one. Jonathan had come over Hemlock Mountain, and here he was, safe at his aunt's house. He began to feel big and noble and brave. Jonathan seemed to grow an inch taller as he stood waiting for his aunt to open the door. Footsteps came hurrying through the kitchen. The door opened, and there was his Aunt Emma. She was wearing a big white apron, and Jonathan hoped she had been cooking. By now, he was very, very hungry. "Mercy sakes, Jonathan," said his Aunt Emma. "What are you doing here in this snowy day? Come in." Jonathan went in, but first he shook the snow carefully off his boots. Aunt Emma was a good housekeeper. Then he went into the kitchen. A big fire was burning, and the kitchen was pleasant and warm. The air was full of a good smell. Jonathan sniffed. Cookies. It was quite hard to be polite, but Jonathan sat down in the rocker and tried not to look hungry. He had quite forgotten about the cookies eaten on the way. "Well," said his Aunt Emma, "what brings you here?" "I came to see you, Aunt," said Jonathan, full of politeness and hunger. The big black cat came and rubbed against his legs. Jonathan stroked her. "Tush," said his aunt. "You can't tell me that you came all the way over Hemlock Mountain just for a visit?" Then she looked at him sharply. "Jonathan, did you come all alone over Hemlock Mountain?" "Yes," said Jonathan. "Why?" "Because," said his aunt. "Because what?" said Jonathan. "Because nothing." But Jonathan knew she was thinking about bears. The cat arched her back and purred. Jonathan thought he had been polite long enough, so he allowed himself to give just a small sniff. Sniff, sniff. "Smells good in here," said Jonathan. "Sniff." "Mercy's sake," said his aunt. "You must be hungry coming all the way over the mountain. Would you like a cookie?" "Please, thank you," said Jonathan, hoping he did not sound too eager, hoping, too, that it would not be just one cookie. He need not have worried. His aunt brought a plate with a whole pile of crisp, crunchy cookies. He put them on the table beside him. Then she brought a mug and a big blue pitcher of milk. The cookies were good. Not as good as his mother's, perhaps, but good, just the same. Jonathan rocked and munched on the cookies. He drank milk. He rocked and munched and drank. The clock on the kitchen shelf did its best to tell him that time was passing. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Time to go. Tick, tock. But Jonathan rocked and ate and did not hear it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The fire was warm and Jonathan was most awfully full. He stopped rocking and slowly. His eyes were closed. Jonathan was asleep. Mercy's sakes, thought his aunt. I wonder what the boy wanted. But it would be a shame to wake him, so she let him sleep. Now, I will continue chapter 7 on the next video.